It's great to be back in Lancaster. It always is. Every 6 months we have a board meeting here for the advisory board. And I'm delighted to see friends. Chris Saunders was a fellow classmate of mine in the MBA class of 98-99. And Steve Kempster was leading that program at that time. And I had to choose when I booked my ticket to come here. At the end, I put the credit card details in, and it rejected them. It says, you haven't filled out all the information. You get that little box, that one of them's yellow, and you go back to it, and you put the numbers in again. The list I was given was, what is the reason for travel? Is it for business? I thought, well, sort of. The next choice was, is it for leisure? No, it's not for leisure, surely not. And the third choice was, is it to see friends and family? And that was the choice I made. Because that's the feeling I have when I come back to Lancaster. It's connecting with friends that I've studied with, faculty that I've been engaged with for a long time. And I think as we all are part of this Lancaster family, you're part of that, aren't you? You're coming back here tonight for that. I want to encourage you after this talk to stick around then and engage further with this. I think there's some food coming and some more drinks and so forth. So make that a primary reason for being here. And I'll share some thoughts and you can talk about them over some drinks later, but make that primary. Because sometimes I go to conferences and the content is so overloaded that the moderator will come on and say, oh, we've got more content to dump on you, and so we're canceling the coffee time and the meal time, which is really where a lot of the benefit is. So I want to steer you more in that direction. Now, I understand the only thing between those drinks and yourselves is me. So there's a bit of a hot spot. And we've just come out of an audit meeting for the advisory board. So if anybody does need a drink, it's probably myself after that, a panel of auditors looking at the strategy of the school. I will be speaking tonight on this topic of leading growth in a complex operating environment. And that will, of course, be an issue in many sectors. In fact, pick a sector where it's not relevant. Public sector, commercial sector, small businesses, corporations, associations. I will be speaking through the window of the humanitarian context, okay? So the context might be a little bit different than what you're used to, but the issues you will probably recognize in many ways. There'll be human resource issues, there'll be strategy issues, there'll be governance issues, there'll be international structure issues, there'll be funding issues, I could go on and on, okay? So we'll touch on some of those themes, but we'll go through the window of humanitarian issues. And we have an extremely mixed crowd here tonight. If this were a class where we're all focused on one thing, then it might be a little bit easier, but it's a bit of a challenge for me because what is the one or two takeaways that I could give that you could all apply to your lives somehow on this theme, right? So the way we'll approach it is more of a fireside conversation than a lecture of me presenting my model or other models where you have to remember a lot of data, okay? I will pause at a bunch of places and ask for your comments and ask for your questions, and I may give questions to you. So do stay on your toes, okay? I may pick some of you out even for those questions, so stay on your toes. And I think with the diversity of this group, it is including faculty, administrators here at the school, former students, local business, from those people that are living around and have been living around Lancaster for a long time, to people that are coming here for just a little while, living in parts of the world far away, in Asia and Africa and other places. So that's a bit of the mix. Now I want to take us into the context, complexity issues around growth and leadership, okay? And this next piece, this next slide, many of you would have seen this week, right? I won't ask for a show of hands. I won't be that brutal yet, but you would have seen it this week in The Economist, right? I saw it this week. I live in Switzerland, and it comes to my box on Saturday, and I was reading through it, and I didn't have a lot of time, so I saw the photo, and that it caught my attention. But I have 4 little kids, and they caught my attention too, and so I was going on. But I went back to it, and I went back to it because on the very next page is this full color page ad for luxury high-rises in Monaco. The very next page, right? And which is great, a nice place and fantastic. And then the page after that are 8,000 pound flats in central London on offer. And it just says available for 8 million pounds. And I wasn't sure if that was to buy or to rent or for the night or what, but they look nice. Yeah, it was a nice advert. Nothing wrong with that. But for me, it was mental gymnastics. To go from this picture to that at the turn of a page. And can we comprehend that? What's happening here, I thought. Who is she, I thought. What is she doing? Who does she work for? How is that relationship with her boss? Does she have a family? Does she have a name? What are her hopes? And what are her fears? And the article then is about Congo, and I'll talk a little bit more about Congo in a few minutes, but certainly in Congo, if you're a woman in Congo, you probably do have the fear of rape, because rape is a tool of war, right? And I won't go into more horrific stories about that, but those are the issues in and around her life. And it reminded me of back in 94, I'll tell a little bit about my journey now. My journey of life. I was brought up in Chicago and went to school in the United States in Minnesota and Wisconsin and studied management and later geography and anthropology. In between, I had traveled quite a bit. I'd been to Africa and canoed down a part of the Congo River and traveled through other parts of remote Africa. And then, after one of those degrees, I asked myself, and I prayed to God, I said, how can I use my experiences and my privileged situation, growing up in Chicago, going to good schools? I feel very privileged. How can I use those skills for some time to serve the poorest on this planet? Not really knowing that much about, but having now touched poverty, because going to the Congo, at that time it was Zaire, and it was led by a gentleman named Sesoseke Mobutu. And any of you that know your African history know what he did to that country to disassemble it after several decades. And so it was just going back to the bush. There wasn't healthcare system, there was certainly no postal service, there was no education system, and strife of all kinds. And so I saw poverty in a group of, when I was buying one of these boats to take down the river, a group approached my friends and myself and said, could you take this proposal out and try to find us some help? And in the proposal were requests for things like seeds and farming tools and a bicycle for the pastor to be able to do his job, and some books for the library, being under a tree, sort of a hut thing. And that challenge, I think, probably changed my life. So a challenge to bring hope and compassion to this community was extended, and when I got back to the US, I hunted around. I came across an organization called Food for the Hungry and met with one of the directors there and shared this story and those issues. And that began a relationship, and I did some training with them, and they said, could you go to work in Sudan during the war at that time, when it was all one country? And you'll have to raise your own money for that, about $20,000, and we need you there right away. There's no budget for your salary. That needs to go into the program. Nobody's really interested in paying your salary, right? So there's no budget for that, because you have to ask anybody on the street, where do you want your money to go when you make a donation? It's not to pay someone's salary, is it? It's to go to the point of need. So I thought, no, I can't do it. I've been traveling around and a little bit disconnected from sources that could provide that kind of funding. And someone said to me, if God has a plan for your life, he's got the means for you to fulfill that plan, but he also gave you a brain, probably a healthy body, and some abilities. You need to leverage that. You need to use that. What do you have that you can put toward that effort? And so I thought about that. I thought, if anybody else said anything else, I probably would have ignored it. But that hit me like a lightning bolt. and that I shouldn't shirk from that challenge. And so the idea came then to ride my bicycle across America and to engage everybody along the way on this issue of poverty, suffering, what I've seen, what people can do about it, and one of those options would be coming alongside me, accompanying me in this effort as I would go off to Africa. But also left it, do something in your own community, right? And so that that trip of engaging the media and kids smoking pot in the park and school teachers buying food in the shops that I bumped into along the way, and all walks of life I touched on that journey, made me realize that even if I never get to Africa, I had the privilege of engaging and challenging millions of people, in fact, on this topic of compassion, on suffering, and what we can do about it. And so that then led me to, and I'll speed things up and move into some of these issues. That's just a bit of a background, how I was touched and took up this challenge seriously. I went to Rwanda instead because the genocide was happening, and I was asked to go to respond to the rapid response team in Rwanda, and was there for several years, and in Angola as well during the war, a place with 15 million landmines at that time. If you remember, Mr. Savimbi was running the UNITA rebel movement, so we worked on that side and had our offices on the government side, so in and out of war zones quite a bit. I was almost killed in 97, and then that made me rethink things a little bit, and should I keep doing this? Or maybe take a pause, reflect, and move into another area of interest. And I met my fiance there. She's a Swiss doctor. So we came back to Switzerland. We married. I came and did my MBA, thinking I'll go and work in the corporate sector after my MBA, and maybe somehow I'll return to this in a more strategic way. So I went to Credit Suisse, went to Swissair, and then came back and was asked to lead Medair. And Medair is an organization that goes to the most remote, difficult to access populations on the planet, bring humanitarian assistance in the form of shelter, water, health, and a lot of other things to do with livelihoods. In Pakistan, it was bringing buffaloes in to provide widows with a way to get milk, yogurt, and building of high alpine schools, and so on and so forth. So we can talk more about that and what Medair does. But let me ask you, turn to your neighbor, please, on your right or on your left, and it could be 2 or 3 of you together. Turn to your neighbor and share your names, where you're from, what countries you've spent time in, and then think about some of the global challenge. What do you think are some of the big global challenges that we face in the world today, say over the next 5 years and more? Okay? Name, where you're from, global challenges. Go. You've got 1 minute. Time out. You probably go on all night, so it's a nice buzz. At 7 o'clock at night, you still got quite a bit of energy. That's inspiring. No one asked what global challenges are, so we'll probably get some definitions in a minute. Before we do, and I'd like to hear your answers, let's shift into this next piece, which is a little bit around the change, again, back in that humanitarian sector context. When I started to work in Rwanda, as I mentioned earlier, back in '93, the height of information technology was a fax machine. Think about it. It was that thing over there. Do you remember those? People remember this? Now, and some in this room might be able to tell stories about what was before that, but I don't want to go back that far. So now we see that information is in real time, everywhere, used by anyone, and is uncontrollable, right? Communication technology, where we have it. And I could tell you stories about how we use, professionally use information in pretty remote, difficult to access places, and how we depend on that. But back then it was running logistics operations in war zones with a lot of people at stake, with a lot of goods and so forth, and kind of driving it all through a headquarters with one of these. It has heat, sand, little lizards and all kinds of stuff that crawl in and out of these machines, and I'm not exaggerating. So there are challenges that come with this increased communication ability, of course, but also huge, so opportunities, I mean, but there are also huge challenges, because how do you, in a politically volatile environment, the issues with brand, the issues with blogging, and staff that aren't well trained, that put stuff out that can bring your colleagues' lives at risk. So there's big security issues that come from this ramp up of information technology. It was a little bit easier back then, not as effective, but a major change. And if you're in marketing and you work in the kind of environments I've worked in, there's a lot of nervousness around that. We look at finances as just one other area. Back at that time, again, when I began, an audit, I mentioned audit earlier tonight, and an audit might be for some hours, and it might be over some pages, like a couple of pages of text, and then maybe an Excel sheet or two. And that might cover hundreds of thousands of pounds. Now, audits are for many, many days. Maybe I'll link a statistic that goes to the growth piece in a minute. When I came in to be the CEO at Medair, I think we had some audits during the year, of course. We had a lot of government funding, so we had a lot of audits. That's good. It grew to more than one per week on average, somewhere in the organization. That's KPMG, Deloitte, Pricewaterhouse, all the big names of auditing companies. Somewhere in the organization was happening almost all the time. And I'm talking about also in headquarters, but really remote, difficult to access places. What does that mean for doing your work? I mean, we're talking about preparing for an audit here on strategy and so forth for the business school. I don't know how long it's been going on. It was one, it's every 5 years. Imagine that, do all that work once a week. What kind of systems do you need? What kind of processes do you need? What kind of skills do you need? What kind of software do you need? And is that software going to provide what you need when you need it and where you need it? What kind of security, IT security, are you going to have? So massive change and complexity come in and around that space. OCHA is the Office of Coordination for Humanitarian Affairs by the United Nations. And it does a lot to provide information systems, maps, knowledge for humanitarian actors to be able to do their job better. And they have written a paper in 2010 which defined global challenges. Tom, could you just read that out so we don't have to hear my voice all the time? Read that out loud, please.
Any major trend, shock, or development that has the potential for serious global impacts and thus to create humanitarian needs and change the environments in which humanitarian actors will operate in the coming years.
Okay, that's kind of a mouthful, but let's put some reality on that. This is really then the list. It's not a complete list, but these are some examples of what they mean by what I just read. It's these issues that can create a complex humanitarian emergency. And so my question to you is, which of these issues are isolated? Which of these issues can, if we just, let's just solve the water, let's put in, and let's rank them even. Let's just put them in order here. Let's first do the water issue, and then we'll go on to urbanization, and then, we'll work through a list like that. We'll solve them one after the other, right? No, it's not going to work, is it? Why? Because they're interrelated, which builds the complexity. They're all over the place. And this is as the population is growing. And, it took from the beginning of time until the year 1800 to get to the first billion people. And now we're adding a billion every 12, 15 years. So the issues are escalating. Climate change, let's just look at that for a second. As water levels rise, where do a lot of the people live on the planet? Right, along the coastline. Where will they go? Well, then that comes to migration, right? So we have the humanitarian organizations that are operating and having to raise funds and deal with rapid onset crisis also have to deal with these longer term issues. Okay? Now, rapid onset crisis is a place that Let's name some. Think back over the last 10 years, what were some of the big humanitarian emergencies that you read about in the news? What were some?
Haiti.
Sorry?
Haiti.
Haiti? What happened in Haiti? Haiti's a country. What happened? Earthquake was the event, and so then what was the humanitarian crisis?
Huge crisis. Medicine, homelessness, water, cholera.
Right, there you go. The list gets big of homelessness and broken bones and cholera and so on and so forth. Yeah, there were some others. The tsunami. What region of the world was hit by the tsunami? What countries? Was it one country?
No.
How many countries? 12 countries. Right. And what happened there?
Similar. It started off with people not having access to food, their homes were taken away, their livelihoods, everything.
Livelihood's gone as well, so it's economic development issues as well, right? Some others?
The Japanese tsunami.
Yeah.
Yes, correct. Yeah.
The nuclear plant.
Yeah.
Pakistan, there was a flood and there was an earthquake.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, and some of those, most of those we responded to as an organization. I could talk about long-term ones like in Congo, the Eastern Congo, the war, the civil conflict there. And then in Afghanistan, of course, the crisis happening there. Syria now, civil conflict. West Darfur, conflict. And then of course, Somalia, exactly. Also very experienced in working there. So we have then, you've presented a mix of rapid onset crisis that some are civil conflict, man-made, and others are by nature, like the tornado we just heard about. Now, a complex emergency has sometimes a mix of both of those. So you'll have a natural disaster within a already pretty complex civil conflict. So now you're still, if I give you real life examples, maybe we can at the drinks and so forth, and stories of how we manage in all that space, you'll start to realize that whatever you thought was difficult in your job is peanuts. Really. I mean, to set up a new company in a war zone to bring hope and life to hundreds of thousands of people within 24 hours with no supply chain, where even getting a paperclip is a challenge, right? And what kind of people want to do that? So let's talk about the people a little bit. Well, hold on, because I think maybe the people is going to come up where I'll end in our talk tonight, because I'm not so sure that you'll be able to use and apply some of the elements that we discuss on the humanitarian crisis in your jobs tomorrow, or whatever you're studying tomorrow. And maybe growth isn't a part of exactly what you're doing, what you're working on at the moment. And so I thought, what common ingredient could be useful for all of us to reflect on a little bit? Certainly in that environment that I work in, and I'll talk about this more when we get to the leadership in a few minutes, is relationships. And all of you, I guess, have relationships of some kind. Some healthy, some unhealthy, but it's really key and core. And to work in this environment with all that complexity, if not pouring a lot of energy and time into maintaining, investing, and nurturing relationships, the challenges will just increase. Okay, so it's really an essential and strained area. I'll give you, we'll focus in on one theme for a minute on migration. That was one of the ones on the list, okay? More than 32 million people fled their homes last year because of disasters like the kind we just talked about. A lot of that was in Asia and Africa, and some, like the tornado case we've just heard about, the tragedy that happened in Oklahoma, it would be in this more richer countries. And floods in India and Nigeria accounted for 41% of that displacement. Now, there's the picture of what I've just read, with a little more information around it. Maybe you can't see so well in the back, I apologize for that. But this is done by Norwegian Refugee Council, which focuses its work on refugees. Now, would all of those people that I just mentioned, if they're, say the people in Oklahoma, are they refugees because they've lost their homes? Are they refugees? I'll show you a picture of what a refugee camp looks like in a minute. No. There's populations of internally displaced people they stay within the country, and a refugee will have to leave the country for safety or political reasons, and they become an international refugee. So this work is focusing mostly on refugees, and you'll see Bangladesh, you'll see Cuba, you'll see Nigeria, flooding, of course, South Sudan because of the war and the separation there, and the Philippines, and a whole variety of issues. One box is one disaster, and when it has several, that's several disasters. Typhoons, floods, hurricanes, and so forth. When I lived in around the Zaire-Rwanda border, I remember, there's 1 million people in the refugee camp there in Zaire, and I remember this is like the picture of vulnerability, because these people had left the country they were born and lived in and loved in fear for their lives. They moved to Zaire to be living under a piece of plastic, for many years. And there's cholera around. Some bodies are even in the lake on one side, deep forest and jungle on the other, with the head of the corrupt government being at the other end of that forest. The international border that they can't cross on the other side, no, all sort of contained in that space. And the other thing on the northern border of all this is this big volcano. And I climbed to the top of that volcano, and I looked down inside, and it's really high. And you look down inside, and it's all bubbling lava down there. It's live. I thought, it could go at any time. I didn't think it was going to go that day, and it didn't go that day, but it did go some years later, and it poured all the lava out of the top and down in and around all of that I just described. That is vulnerability. So again, if you think that your situation is vulnerable, it might be, truly. But that is extreme vulnerability. And so that's some of the fear in the situations that people live in. Now here's an internally displaced people camp. This is in Burma, Myanmar. This is a common scene, standing in line a lot. Questions arise of, should we build a school there? Yes, schools are good. Education is important. Should we build a school in the refugee camp? Lots of them. What a great, all the kids are there. We'll give some food. Well, there's some drawbacks with that, because then you start to put, does it become permanent? Because the idea is not to create a refugee camp for life. And when we come in with compassion, well-meaning compassion, it can mess things up. So it takes a lot of wisdom of how to engage with populations and provide the right kind of assistance in that kind of a situation. What we haven't talked about yet is where the money comes from and the changes and the complexities there. So I got this a couple days ago from the Chronicles of Philanthropy. And I thought I would just put this up as a prompter to talk about funding for humanitarian disasters. And it comes in it comes through a few channels. Some are very institutional government channels, like DFID in the UK, various UN partners, the European Commission, ECHO, based in Brussels, USAID, and so on and so forth. Philanthropists giving huge sums of money, corporate philanthropy, private philanthropy. Here, this is private. Individuals, smaller individuals, if a system is set up to give £1 on your phone using social media to an organization to respond to crisis, you give £1, but if 3 million people do that, I think that's roughly £3 million, right? So that's not bad. So there's a role there. So different levels and segments of funding with different requirements, and foundations as well, big foundations. And that place is changing and becoming more complex too, because Bill and Melinda Gates, they're individuals, right? It's a family foundation, the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. So is that'd be treated in a organization through its constituents, maybe in the marketing department, to deal with private individuals and philanthropists? Well, the kind of sums that they're of the grants that they're making require to be quite institutional, with a lot of audit and reporting and monitoring and evaluation that I spoke of earlier. So is it institutional or private? Well, that's an interesting question. How do you deal with it in your organization? Do you have the right staff? Do you have the right roles lined up to manage those kinds of relationships? Very interesting, very challenging. Then we have the institutional grants and the changes in that space and the demand for collaboration. So institutional grants now, it's not that I write a proposal for £3 million to do this work in that country and it's all tidy. No, it's required that, and for good reason, for increased collaboration across the humanitarian partners, which is good. But it puts in an extra layer of complexity because you got to manage those relationships then. You may have heard the saying that the road to heaven is paved with partnerships, and so is the road to hell. And maybe you're thinking about some of the partnerships you've been involved with, maybe privately or maybe in business, and you can see, oh gosh, it's hard. 2 is hard, 5 is really hard. So there's this requirement that's coming in, and some of the funding, that you don't get the funding unless you're partnered up in various ways. So that's some of the challenges. And let me pause now for a moment. Any questions so far about anything? Yes?
Who's number one?
Who is number one? That is a good question. I don't know. I don't really care. It's a good question. Warren Buffett, Bill Gates. Yeah, sorry I cut number 1 off. I do apologize, whoever that was. It was more the theme. But they're younger, changing demographic. 10 years ago, you wouldn't have a list like that with those kinds of numbers with someone under 40, for sure. Okay. Other points, questions, comments? Yes?
When you have to work with these private organizations, like say the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, and you said that they have to do so much of complex auditing, but honestly, I mean, we had a project this year when we had to work with actually the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, but
yeah.
And when we talked to the people who work in this particular project, they said they had a lot of feedback saying that this doesn't happen. So I'm asking you, does this auditing actually happen? Does it really happen?
Oh, does it happen? Oh boy, you mean, did those 50 audits, what was behind them? Did people really show up with checklists and want the numbers and so forth? Ooh.
This is because when we did the interviews, we got a mixed feedback.
Yeah, so it's a great point, and this is why. Really the governmental funding that uses public funding, not a foundation like Gates and many others. We focus on that one because we know that one has some brand equity in our minds, but really the governmental type of funding, those audits are serious. And if you don't have, look, when we're evacuating a team out of northern Afghanistan, and I say we because my passion is in the organization that I led, and I continue to donate there, and not there now, but we as when I worked there, of course. When we evacuate, we're looking for the helicopter, not the receipts. But if we don't have the receipts, for every bag of nails, you pay back. Right? So that's that level. And I don't say this as a complaint, because audit can be a good thing. Audit recommendations are a good thing. Boards of organizations that take those serious and do things about them, it's good. Sometimes it's too good, it's too much, of course. I think the place of ambiguity can be where delivering operational organizations haven't had that kind of funding and therefore have never dealt with that kind of scrutiny, and therefore they don't deal with that level of accountability and transparency, which comes from a lot of private funding. Because private funding doesn't. It moves in that direction a little bit more, but there's generally not the kind of the red tape and the demands of transparency and accountability like you'd have with government funding. It doesn't surprise me that you made that. It's also appreciated, because many organizations aren't looking for more red tape. They just want the money to do their job. Yeah. Any other questions? One more, move on. Yes, yes.
So given the range of types of problems that we listed earlier on, and the complexity, how do you as an NGO define the scope of what you want to get involved in, or the sort of problems that you solve? Yeah,
so strategy, and part of that will be coming from, maybe I'll just answer that. The first thing that I did when I came into the organization was set a vision for 10 years. And that put some boundary, it quieted some discussions. There were a lot of great discussions happening, but it was interesting opinions being shared. Should we be more release? Should we be more development? How do you get some frame around that? And that was through a process. It took me 6 months with my leaders and myself to really articulate and get full buy-in by the board. And I went to deep field and had interviews under acacia trees on extracting the passion and the problems and the issues and the areas to focus on for vision. And then later that came to values, and there was another quite a long process to bring shape on values. And then that turned into, obviously we're we're operating the whole time. We didn't stop what we're doing. Oh, let's just sort all this out and kind of perfect our organizational identity and all that. No, we're in all these places. So it's, in a way, rebuilding the airplane while you're flying. But then it moves into being very articulate about strategy and in a way that is simple and not complicated, because the people that we hire haven't got time for complication, aren't interested in it, and don't have the background to deal with it. So it's got to be simple, it's got to be clear, and executable. That's often where it falls down with many organizations. We get caught up in the busyness of good things. It's often a long list of to-do lists, not prioritized, of good things. And that we maybe some tools to be more concrete. That was maybe about some of the process, how we'd get there. Some of the tools are the Humanitarian Need Index developed by the European Commission. That's great, because now we can see where are the needs in the world. How does that match up with our mandate as set in our charter and our vision? Now the list gets shorter. Okay, what's our sweet spot? What are our strengths? Now the list gets shorter. Okay, and then to develop a portfolio that you can manage, and then it becomes it's portfolio management. Is that helpful? Is that, yeah. So 15 minutes left, and here we are at this issue of VUCA, vulnerability, uncertainty, complexity, ambiguity. That's not just for the humanitarian sector. Okay. It's for your jobs. It's for where you work. It's the world we live in. Okay, volatility, dealing a lot with speed of change, uncertainty a lot around the possibility of surprises and lack of predictability of issues that can come toward us. Complexity, looking at chaos and confusion in an organization. Ambiguity around, can I trust the data? Is there any haziness around what I'm looking at? Do we really understand the issues? And it's tough, certainly in the area we work in, it is tough to really, do we really get it? There's cultural issues, there's funding issues, uncertainties of processes throughout the whole value chain. So one thing I want to point out, though, is stakeholders. In the not-for-profit sector, and Charles Handy will write about it. I read about it in The Guardian this week. It's all over the place that often it becomes very difficult for not-for-profit organizations in a way that's different from for-profit organizations, in that there's a more complex map of stakeholders. In the pages that I've showed you before, the customer doesn't pay because they don't have any money. They lost everything. They can't pay. I'm seeing, hard humanitarian crisis issues. So then, who pays, and who do I report to? How does that work? And the interests of the various stakeholders in the game. What are some? You saw some pictures. Maybe I'll pull one back up while you think about who are some of the stakeholders in this situation here. Who are some stakeholders?
Government.
Government, yes. And what levels of government? Local government, tribal even government, then national government, and then international governments as well, and foreign policy. Yeah, okay. Was there another? Victims. Yeah, victims, yeah. Those that will benefit from the services that we bring, yeah.
All the support agencies.
Support agencies, yeah. Some more. Community, yes. Wider community, of course, yes. Donors of all kinds of flavors. Not one donor. You've got a mix of all those donors with different interests coming in. And some donors want, they collide. Their interests collide in that situation, yeah.
Your employees itself.
Employees, yes, yes. Boards, future employees, yes.
People who were living there before.
Yes. We could keep going. This goes on and on. I remember one of my staff, I was giving a talk to new recruits in the organization, and I challenged them to think a little bit beyond what the obvious were in stakeholders. And I said, peacekeepers. They're one. Oh, yeah, peacekeepers, yeah. I said, well, what's the profile of the peacekeepers? And they said, yeah, they're male guys, probably around 25 to 35 years old or something. I said, yeah. I said, who do we hire? And they talked about that. I said, we hire a lot of nurses, don't we? And what are their ages, right? And you could have driven a truck through this guy's mouth when the penny dropped. He goes, oh, they want our women. you know, and you know, it's not a big thing. I don't think it's a major issue to deal with in the humanitarian sector. But just to say that the obvious stakeholders are not, you know, there's more there. There's a lot of unsaid interests all over the stakeholder map that it adds to this sort of this VUCA of, do I really know what's happening? So growth. We'll come to Carrie Cooper's paper in just a minute. Professor Cooper is a great contributor to the management school, and I want to reflect on a piece there. But what can, I think, foster growth in an organization? You take a situation where there's a lot of, you could say, opportunity. There's opportunity to do something here, right, in the humanitarian crisis. A lot of opportunity, demand, need, really. And you put in place, I was just reflecting the other day, this is not a model that I've read, it's not written about, but I was just reflecting, when we look at growth, what's the people element there? Because we hire people that are good at identifying needs, acquiring resources, they can function well in dangerous circumstances and uncomfortable circumstances, deal with a huge number of stakeholders, are multi-skilled with technical skills, negotiation skills, decision-making skills, are resilient, courageous, intelligent. They can work in teams, and maybe teams that they didn't, made up of people that they didn't choose, and set goals and work toward them. They can bring positive impact, and in the face of all these huge challenges, and do it with passion. Because those are as I reflect back, those are the kind of people we want to hire. And not be able to pay them too much, because again, back to the beginning, there's not a lot of funding for their salaries and training and development and so forth. So if you put people in those situations, and there's motivation and there's encouragement and good leadership, it will grow. The organization will grow, the project will grow. In fact, if leadership doesn't have a way to control the growth, and that's where I put a bunch of time, vision and values, and then being able to well manage and control that growth. Because if you say yes to everything because you have a big heart, there's people suffering and a report comes in and says, yeah, we could do all these things. Oh, yeah, let's do it. And then another one comes in from another country and with a request because we hired these people to do that, right? And we approve that too. Yep, do it. You end up with a portfolio that isn't really a portfolio. It's just this confused, big contortion of what we might call compassion, but it actually isn't good management. It's not strategic, and I question how compassionate it really is. So being very professional in that space and aligning this compassion and passion and will with skill is who we hire. And I think that's a big driver of the growth that we had experienced that I had to try and control with my management team. Now, Carrie Cooper has written a paper in January, which was one of the winners of the Chartered Management Institute. Is Anne still here? Anne Frank, CEO of CMI? Oh, just gone, okay. She's the CEO of CMI, and she pointed out to me last night his article. And here he talks about growth being key in addressing issues of wellness in organizations. It's moving out of the humanitarian sector now. So now let's look at, I think, probably mostly in the UK. We can see here that organizations that are growing have less of these disorders and issues of anxiety and panic attacks and stress and insomnia and so forth. His research points out. Yeah, you can, I think you can see it in the back, okay? So he points out that growth is a key when looking at the viability and the longevity and the health of an organization. Now, in international NGOs, they grow in several different ways. I won't go through the examples of these, but an area that I brought a lot of focus on was understanding what model are we. Is that the model that we want to be of growth? And how should we control that growth? Because when I came into the organization, it was about 15 million in revenues, helping about 1 million people a year, actually per day throughout the year. with about 600 staff. And after 7 years, we were supporting more than 3 million people a year with about 50 million in revenues with over 1,800 staff. And, so growth, so the article points out the benefits of growth, but I just pause there a second. Growth at what cost? Are we able to match the capacity and the resources with that growth in the face of all this need and suffering? And that is really a challenge. And that's where the strategy, that's your point around how do you get scope and make tough decisions. But it's easier to make the harder decisions if you're clear about your strategy and where you're going. You can explain it. Now let's throw in an economic crisis. Everything I've just said, now bring in, I remember some of the decisions I had to make back in October and November and December of 2008 and into 2009. Then it gets even more challenging. So the point around growth is key, but I just want to highlight that this issue of growth at any cost will mean strains and struggles, and usually it's the HR departments that have to clean up the mess of a lot of that. So if any of you are in HR out here, you're heroes, because this is a lot of the stuff that you probably deal with. So there's a lot around recruiting and inducting of staff, which is absolutely key. Jim Collins, I'm coming to the end here. Jim Collins wrote, "A company should limit its growth based on its ability to attract enough of the right people." So for me, it was around getting the right people in the right place to do the right things at the right time, and with not a lot of salary and benefits. Challenge. So when I go to banks, and I've done quite a bit of speaking with ultra high net worth clients of banks, and dealing with bankers and so forth. And I remember going to they had me engage a room like this, and they were all bankers, and I said, you guys are whining about not getting your bonuses, and therefore you're not motivated enough to do the jobs that you want to do. I thought, well, I kind of let them have it because, well, I won't go into that. That's another piece by Carol. I'll move on, but these are some of the leadership attributes. I'll take the top three. Empowering, trust, and being accessible as a leader are keys to this organizational health. And I would apply that to the environment that I'm used to working in. And then on the negative side is being very authoritative, being very secretive, holding back of information, and being perceived as suspicious. Those are points that a leader will probably bring the organization down. And which will lead us some questions at the end in a couple of minutes around what kind of leader are you? We'll get to that in a second. As I look back, before I look back on, did my MBA help me with any of this stuff? I'll answer that question in a moment. Drum roll. Yeah. Humanitarian challenges in leadership. So the Feinstein Institute at Tufts in the US has put together an institute around a lot of these issues that we talk about. There's papers. If you want to go deeper on this topic, it'd be a good place to start. You can Google Feinstein Institute, Feinstein Center. And they look at humanitarian challenges in leadership in this way. Navigating these dynamics will require leadership that is comfortable with ambiguity and risk, which is obsessive about evidence and data, but is not constrained by it, not getting overwhelmed by all the bureaucracy. We will need leadership that encourages dissent and experimentation in organizations that are flatter, more dominated by the twin functions of ground delivery and global analysis, and less dragged down by the compliance processes of financial obligations and the public sector. So that's their view. That's written for the humanitarian sector. I'm guessing that will apply to anyone in this room. As I look back, what were some of the things that my MBA helped me in to navigate in this space? One is the use and the language of models. And Steve's here. You taught me some of those models, so thank you. And others that I deal with on the advisory board, former professors, I recall those models. And I'm not joking, I do. There's the obvious ones, the SWOT and the PEST and so forth. But then to develop my own. And I remember I came into leading one of our board meetings, and I needed to explain an area that was rather tricky on this whole issue of governance and management in an international organization. And I could go on for hours about that theme, we won't do it now. But this model came to mind, which is above the line is everything to do with governance. And below the line is everything to do with management. And that line is often very foggy. And often you see governors, board members, moving into this space. It's where the action is. It's where the money is. It's where the operations are. It's where the decisions are, not in kind of boring board meetings, right? And because that stuff might not be getting done, the oversight of the organization, maybe sometimes the executive even moves up and takes care of that. So everything can get flip-flopped and really messy. Relational issues then develop. And then you read about it in the newspaper about the bust-up between the chairman and the CEO. Okay? Then there's this issue around international and national. So you have a headquarters somewhere in the world and all these national offices all over the place. And this model then helped us to talk about, is that national governance issue or an international management issue? And whose responsibility is that? And who has the authority over that? And how do we link that to our job descriptions? And how do we make decisions in that space? So that was just something that comes out of the MBA. Another one, quick one. I remember sitting down with a head of philanthropy for a large bank. And he asked me to lunch. And I didn't write this on a serviette. I must have pulled out a paper because where he took me, they didn't have paper serviettes. And I thought, what language can I use to help him understand kind of the world that I work in? Because we want to have this conversation, hopefully that would bring philanthropic funding into our sector, into our organization. So I said to him, look, and this model just came to mind just while I was sitting there on this serviette. I said, look, your customers, the acronym used is ultra high net worth clients. 50 million francs, pounds, dollars invested or more. And usually that'd be the minimum, but most would have hundreds and hundreds of millions invested as clients. And I work for my customers ultra low net worth, $1 a day. So when I explained that, he kind of, that was a bit of a shock. Then I said, but we're at the table. You and I are at the table. You and I, you're coming from this side and I'm coming from that side. We're both leaders in this space for our organizations. And we are at the table talking. Now we have leaders over here, managers that are out in all these countries leading all these operations. And you have leaders, managers that are out dealing with your clients. Now, they're not at the same table. They never see each other. They don't even know each other exists. They talk totally different languages. Okay? Now, we have customers and you have customers. Ultra low net worth, ultra high net worth. And they are on totally different planets. And I said then, if we want to get the plumbing going from the resource to the need, in the humanitarian space, the plumbing is a bit clogged up. There's leakage here, there's reservoirs there building up. How can we get better plumbing so that we can bring some hope in this space? Is there anything you can do about that within your sphere of influence? Where's the blockage? And then we started to unpack that. And so probably both very simplistic, overly simplistic, probably flaws all over them, but just tools that came out of my MBA that helped me in that space. Also learning about myself, increased abilities in research and so on and so forth. So my time is coming to an end, and I want to come then to, I have some stories to tell that I can share later at the coffee, and I'll end then back on this picture that we started with. And who is she? What is her name? What are her hopes and fears? Some of the questions I asked. And then maybe I'll leave us with a challenge of, is there someone in your life where investing in relationship is key, where there needs to be some work done? Is there someone that I can express compassion to that I haven't really thought of before? I read the story the other day of Dr. Haggai, who runs a leadership institute, and he checked in at a hotel, and the guy at check-in said, "Oh, you're in the presidential suite." No. I booked into the, one of the, just a single room. No, the general manager bumped you up to the presidential suite. So the general manager came and he said, you don't remember me, do you? And he said, no. He said, when I was in Singapore and used to come there every few weeks for meetings, I was the bellhop. Now he's the general manager of this big hotel, Hyatt or Intercontinental, I think. And you treated me no different than you treated the general manager. And you can't believe how much that touched me. And so for years I harbored in my heart, is there some way I can show compassion to that guy? I hope I meet him someday. If there's a way I can just pay back and express my insight and the joy that he brought to me. And so that's why he did that. And he had no idea. And I could, share stories. We often don't see the fruit of it. But if we're managers and leaders, how do we treat our people? Do we recognize those? Do we say thank you? And with that, I think I will end and say thank you very much. I'll leave one last point. I went to this website. I'm not affiliated with the Relationship Global organization. They're in Cambridge. They do a lot of writing on this topic of relationships. I thought it would be a key theme for tonight for us to explore. But that photo is one of my former staff. And it's really funny. It was interesting to see that my organization was a part of this. And they do a lot of looking at relationships in organizations and how they can become more relational and see the world through the eyes of relationships. Is there one or two questions? Or maybe, why don't we leave it there and we'll officially break. I'll stay here for a while. And please talk amongst yourselves about anything we've talked about or anything else tonight at the drinks. See you out there. Thank you.